There are cold mornings in the Highlands when a cottage does not simply feel chilly, but personally offended by the idea of comfort. On such mornings, people discover the truth about themselves. Some become generous, some become brave. Some become very interested in what their neighbours have, and how they came by it. In Lochs, the winter snap had tightened its grip on the village, and the old fuel club, that practical little arrangement meant to keep everyone warm at a fair price, had begun to produce more whispers than heat. A gauge did not match a ledger. A few tanks seemed mysteriously low, and nobody, of course, wished to admit they were cold. Tonight's mystery begins not with a body, but with a radiator that refused to warm. Settle in now, and let us return to Lochs. Chapter 1. Cold Radiators. Hamish Macbeth woke with the tip of his nose cold enough to qualify as a second weather report. For a while he lay still beneath 2 blankets, one old army coat, and a knitted throw that Mrs. Wellington had once donated to a jumble sale and then taken back because she had decided it was not quite done with. The cottage was quiet. Too quiet. There was none of the soft ticking that came when pipes accepted warmth. No discreet hum from the little heater he had meant to stop using because it ate electricity as greedily as Blair ate praise. Lugs, who had somehow managed to arrange himself in the warmest remaining dip of the bedding, opened one eye and looked at Hamish with disappointment. It was not accusation exactly. Lugs was too lazy for full accusation before breakfast. But it came close. "Aye," said Hamish. "I noticed." He got up reluctantly. The floorboards received his bare feet with spite. His breath showed in front of him in a faint, pale drift, making the room look less like a police house and more like a place where herrings might be stored. The kettle clicked. Then the lights went out. Hamish stood in the sudden grey and listened to the cottage hold its silence. "Grand," he said. The fuse had tripped again. That was the trouble with trying to run a kettle, a heater, and the last remaining dignity of a Highland policeman from wiring that had been old when Blair had still possessed hope. He went to the cupboard, flicked the switch, and found himself thinking, with an unwilling squeeze of embarrassment, about his oil tank. He had checked it the previous night with a torch held between his teeth, and the gauge had looked less like a measurement and more like a warning. He had told himself it would last. Men had lived with less. Highland folk were not made of pastry. Then he had gone to bed wearing socks. By 8:30, he was on the road to Patel's shop, collar turned up, boots cracking over frozen ruts. Lochs lay under a hard white crust of frost. Smoke rose from the chimneys that could afford it. Other cottages gave off that particular look of stubborn poverty, curtains drawn against both cold and inquiry. At the shop door, Lugs decided to contribute to public life by lying exactly where people wanted to stand. He stretched one paw over the threshold and closed his eyes. "Shift yourself," said Hamish. Lugs did not shift. Mrs. Patel stepped over him with the smoothness of long practice, carrying a crate of onions. "Leave him," she said. "He has found the only place without a draught." Inside, the shop smelled of bread, paraffin, damp wool, and people pretending not to listen. The cold had brought everyone in early. Nessie Curry stood near the counter in a hat with a feather that had lost its purpose. Jessie Curry hovered beside her, carrying a shopping basket with one tin of peaches in it, as if she had come in on urgent fruit business. Archie McLean was there, stamping his boots. Mrs. Wellington stood upright by the biscuit shelf, disapproving of the temperature on behalf of civilization. Rory Bain, thin, sharp-faced, and 22, lingered near the newspapers, with the defensive air of a young man used to being suspected before he spoke. Hamish picked up batteries he did not need. Pride often required a prop. "Cold morning," said Mr. Patel from behind the counter. "Aye," said Hamish. "It's thinking about becoming personal." Nessie leaned closer to Jessie. "Agnes says the gauge at the club tank is wrong." "The gauge," repeated Jessie, obedient and grave. Mrs. Wellington sniffed. "Gauges do not usually become wrong only when people are short." "That is what I said," said Nessie, though she had not. I said to Jessie, "Did I not say, Jessie, That gauges are very steady-minded things? You said Agnes said it, said Jessie. That is near enough. Hamish looked at Mr. Patel. Trouble with the fuel club? Mr. Patel's face took on the careful neutrality of a shopkeeper, who knew that neutrality was sometimes the only stock that mattered. There is a small discrepancy. A small discrepancy, said Mrs. Wellington, is what a committee calls a large mess before minutes are taken. Rory gave a short laugh, then stopped when two heads turned. The Lochs Fuel Club had begun as a decent arrangement. Heating oil cost less when ordered in bulk. Those who could pay up front did. Those who could not paid when they could. With Agnes Meldrum keeping the ledger and the schedule, the supplier delivered to the locked shed and tank behind Patel's. From there, emergency top-ups and smaller quantities were arranged for outlying cottages, old folk, and anyone who did not wish to explain why they could not meet the minimum. It was community spirit, which meant it ran on goodwill, shame, and one person's handwriting. That person was Agnes Meldrum. Agnes came in just then, bringing a gust of cold air and importance with her. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, neat as a folded napkin, with silver hair pinned into order and gloves buttoned at the wrist. She carried a clipboard under one arm. "There's no need for talk," she said at once. No one had addressed her. Hamish smiled mildly. "Morning, Agnes. The gauge is temperamental in frost. That's all. Condensation affects things." "Does it?" "It can," said Agnes. She said it too quickly. Mrs. Patel began rearranging tins behind the counter with unnecessary concentration. Agnes tapped her clipboard. "We'll go over everything at the hall this afternoon. Anyone who has paid will get what they are due, and anyone who has not paid should not imagine there will be exceptions because the weather has turned theatrical." Rory's ears reddened, Hamish noticed. So did everybody else, which was the problem with small villages. Privacy did not vanish there. It was eaten politely, in crumbs. "I'm sure folk understand," said Hamish. "Understanding is not accounting," said Agnes. Nessie nodded, pleased by the shape of the sentence. Jessie nodded half a moment later. Hamish bought his batteries. Mrs. Patel added a loaf he had not asked for and gave him a look that dared him to refuse. "Put it on my account," he said. "You do not have an account? Then start me one." She put the loaf in his bag. "It is day old. That's nearly fresh in this weather." Outside, lugs had acquired a circle of inconvenience. Archie was waiting to get past him, too polite to step over a dog that had so obviously retired from movement. Hamish nudged Lugs with his boot. "Come on, old boy!" Lugs opened both eyes, considered the moral weight of the request, and rose with the reluctance of a landlord leaving a warm bar. As Hamish walked back through the village, he saw curtains twitch. Not in curiosity alone, in calculation. Who had heat? Who had none? Who had paid? Who had been helped? Above the roofs, the sky was a hard, pale blue, the sort of blue that gave nothing away. Hamish pulled his coat tighter and wondered whether he could spend an hour at the church hall later on official business. The thought warmed him less than he hoped. Chapter 2. The Fuel Club Sheet. By 3 o'clock, the church hall had become the warmest place in Lochs, and therefore the most moral. No one said they had come for the heaters. They came to clarify. They came to support Agnes. They came because a neighbour had asked them to pass on a question, though the neighbour usually turned out to be themselves. The long tables had been set in a square, which gave the meeting a democratic look while ensuring everybody could see who flinched. The tea urn hissed in the corner. A plate of biscuits sat beside it, rich tea mainly, because chocolate biscuits encouraged people to feel rewarded. Hamish stood near the back, hands in his pockets, allowing the hall radiator to do charitable work on his knees. He had plugged his small heater into a socket behind a stack of folded chairs the previous evening while checking the locks. It was still there. He had not removed it because removing it would have looked furtive, and leaving it there looked official if one did not inspect closely. Mrs. Wellington sat rigidly in the front row. Archie McLean nursed tea in both hands. The Curry sisters occupied the side bench like a two-person press gallery. Rory Bain stood near the door, prepared to leave quickly if shame became too crowded. Agnes Meldrum presided from the top table. Before her lay the sign-up sheet, the payment ledger, a stack of delivery dockets, and a tin cash box with a small key tied to the handle by blue string. Her orderliness was impressive. It gave comfort to people who did not want to ask what order might conceal. Mr. and Mrs. Patel sat nearby. The fuel shed was behind their shop, but everybody knew it was Agnes who ran things. Mr. Patel had once suggested putting the records on a computer. Agnes had looked at him as if he had proposed storing soup in a hat. "We'll begin," she said. "We have begun," whispered Nessie. "We are in the beginning," Jessie whispered back. Agnes looked up. Both sisters became innocent. "There has been unnecessary speculation," Agnes continued. "The winter delivery was made. The official tank gauge is lower than expected. That does not mean theft. It may be a gauge issue, a supplier issue, a settlement issue, or a reporting issue. Or a missing oil issue," said Archie. A few people made small sounds of agreement, then pretended they had not. Before Agnes could answer, the hall door opened, and a man came in carrying Cold with him. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, ruddy-faced, and dressed in the smart, practical clothing of a man who worked near oil without ever meaning to get it on himself. His jacket bore the stitched logo of Northwest Fuel Services. He had a clipboard of his own, which made Agnes's mouth tighten. "Neil Carroll," he announced. "Regional driver and delivery rep. We know who you are," said Agnes. "I expect you do." His smile was brisk and unhelpful. "I'm here because your last two figures don't match our delivery records." A silence fell. It was not the silence of people surprised by news. It was the silence of people hearing someone say aloud what they had been hoping would remain damp and unofficial. Neil placed his folder on the table. "Bulk Club discount depends on proper handling, proper records, and no unauthorized access to stored fuel. If there's mismanagement, we'll have to suspend the arrangement pending review." "Review?" said Jessie softly, as if it were an illness. "You would end the discount?" asked Mrs. Wellington. "If the club can't account for fuel, yes. That would hurt some folk badly," said Hamish. Neil glanced at him. "Then some folk should make sure the records are honest." It was not an unreasonable sentence. It was simply said in the worst possible room. Agnes's cheeks coloured. "My records are honest. I'll inspect the shed, the tank gauge, and the nozzle seals. Then we'll know." He turned toward the hall's side door, where a small sample nozzle and measuring can had been brought in for demonstration after earlier confusion. Agnes had insisted on it being displayed so people could understand the process. Neil picked up the nozzle, turned it, and flicked at the red plastic tamper seal looped through the lever. "This is what should be intact between authorized uses," he said. "Each one has a serial number. Snap it, use the nozzle, record it. Simple." He twisted the seal. It broke with a tiny, dry crack. A small piece sprang away and landed near Hamish's boot. He bent, picked it up, and saw that the broken edge was not clean. It had a little half-moon bite out of one side, as if the plastic had been nipped by a blunt tooth. "Cheap batch," Neil said, noticing. "Some of them break like that. Still readable, though." Hamish turned the fragment between finger and thumb. Red plastic. Tiny black serial digits. A half-moon notch. Nothing in it, perhaps? Still, he slipped it onto the table beside the sample can. Neil went on. "Pleased to have an audience and an enemy at the same time. I'll check tonight against the last docket." "Tonight?" said Agnes. "Aye. After hours. Less audience. There is no need." "There is every need." Neil closed his folder. "If the shortage is innocent, you'll be glad to prove it. If it isn't, best to know before head office does." He poured himself tea, without asking whether it was provided for him. That, more than the threat, seemed to settle people against him. Mrs. Patel watched him. Expression unreadable. The meeting dissolved into mutterings. People moved toward biscuits, toward coats, toward small groups in which their own opinions could be tested before being brought into public. Rory slipped outside. Hamish followed him a minute later and found him by the wall, smoking a cigarette with the guilty concentration of a man who had been told to give up by people who had central heating. "You all right?" asked Hamish. Rory shrugged. "Why would I not be? A room like that can feel close." "Aye, especially when everybody's waiting to hear if you've stolen their heat. Nobody said your name." Rory gave him a look. "That's how I knew." Inside, Agnes was gathering papers, each sheet aligned exactly. Neil Carrow stood over her shoulder, talking too loudly. Hamish saw Agnes smile at him. It was a small smile, polite and thin. It had no warmth in it at all. Chapter 3. Blair Smells, a Moral Lesson. The following morning, Blair arrived in Lochs with the air of a man who had been waiting all winter for someone poorer than himself to behave badly. He parked outside Patel's at an angle that suggested the law need not concern itself with white lines. Then he got out, lit a cigarette, and exhaled toward the shop window as if smoke were a form of authority. Hamish, who had been helping Mr. Patel shift a sack of grit from the doorway, watched him with mild resignation. "Macbeth!" Blair shouted. "What's this I hear? Whole village freezing because some joker's been dipping his hose where he shouldna?" Mrs. Patel, inside the shop, closed her eyes briefly. "Good morning to you, too," said Hamish. Blair's coat strained across his stomach. Frost glittered on the road. His breath came in white bursts, which gave his temper a visible form. "I've been sent to take a look," Blair said. "Though why anyone needs CID for a bunch of villagers who canna manage a fuel tank is beyond me. It's no CID yet. It'll be CID if I say so. A useful arrangement." Blair narrowed his eyes. "Are you getting clever?" "Trying not to. It upsets folk." Nessie Curry appeared beside the postbox with Jessie at her shoulder. Neither had posted anything in years without first confirming who might see them do it. Archie leaned near the shop entrance. Rory Bain came out carrying a packet of cheap tea and stopped when he saw Blair. Blair saw him too. "Well, well," he said. "Here's a face that knows the price of oil." Rory's jaw tightened. "I paid what I could. That's no the same as paying what you owe." Hamish stepped forward slightly. "Leave it, Blair." Blair grinned around his cigarette. "Touchy, are we? Maybe you're worried he'll tell us where he got the idea. I hear you've been warming yourself in the hall like an old widow with a bunion." There were tiny movements then. Nessie's hand to her mouth. Archie looking down. Jessie's embarrassed blink. Mrs. Patel suddenly very busy with the door latch. The remark landed because it was true enough to bruise. Hamish felt heat rise in his face, which was almost welcome given the weather. "My cottage has its moods," he said lightly. "Aye, and no oil, I hear." "You hear a great deal. Small place. Hard to keep secrets." Blair turned back to Rory. "Harder still when folk start siphoning what doesna belong to them." Rory stepped off the curb. "Say it plain." Blair's eyes brightened. He liked anger in others. It made his own seem official. Before Rory could take another step, Hamish's voice changed. "Rory." It was quiet. Soft even. But there was a thinness in it, like wire drawn tight. Rory stopped. Hamish turned to Blair. "And you'll no be bullying a lad in the street because you forgot how to ask a question." The little crowd stilled. Blair stared. "What did you say?" "You heard me fine." For a second, the only sounds were the shop bell moving in the wind and the faint scrape of lugs inside, where he had found something under a shelf that interested him less than sleep but more than duty. Blair dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his shoe. "I'll remember that." "Aye," said Hamish. "Write it down if you like." Blair looked ready to explode, but Neil Carrow came round the corner of the shop just then, carrying a ring of keys and a folded docket. "I wouldn't bother with street theatre," Neil said. "Your answer's behind the shed." Blair turned his irritation toward him with relief. "And you are?" "Neil Carrow. Fuel Company. The man whose paperwork people here seem to dislike." Neil nodded toward the back lane. "The shed lock has scratches." New ones. Tank gauge is down further than expected, and the seal count's wrong. I'm going back tonight to compare the delivery docket properly. Someone's been helping themselves." The words moved through the listeners like cold through a bad window. Agnes Meldrum, who had come from the church hall carrying a folder, stopped near the shop window. Neil saw her. "You'll want to be there, Mrs. Meldrum." "I have nothing to hide." "Good. Then bring the emergency top-up notes too." Her mouth tightened. "Those are private. Fuel Club records aren't private if club fuel is missing. They concern people's dignity. They concern missing oil." Hamish watched Agnes's gloved fingers press harder into the folder's cardboard edge. He also watched Rory, whose anger had turned into something smaller and more frightened. Blair noticed only the easiest thing. "Rory Bain," he said. "Where were you last night?" Rory laughed without humour. "Cold." Neil gave a snort. "That describes half the Highlands." "Aye," said Hamish. "And it proves about as much." Neil checked his watch. "I'll be back at 8. Shed, lock, dockets, seals. After that, I'll decide what goes in my report." Agnes said, "Your report may harm people who have done nothing wrong." "Then perhaps someone should have thought of that before the tank ran dry." He walked away toward his van, boots crunching over frost. The villagers watched him go. There are men who make enemies by doing wrong. There are others who manage it by being right in a way that offers no shelter. Neil Carrow, Hamish thought, might be the second kind. And in Lochs, that could be nearly as dangerous. Chapter 4. The shed behind the shop. By 8 o'clock, sleet had begun to fall sideways. It tapped against windows, hissed on the road, and turned the back lane behind Patel's into a ribbon of black slush. The fuel shed stood beyond the shopyard, a low timber structure with a corrugated roof and a padlock that shone wetly under the security light. Behind it, the bulk tank crouched like something sullen and necessary. Hamish arrived wearing his thick coat and a cap pulled low. He had told himself he was there because Neil Carrow's inspection might lead to trouble. He had not admitted, even to himself, that the church hall was locked and his own cottage was colder than a tax notice. Mrs. Patel opened the back door before he knocked. "He is not here yet," she said. "Neil?" "Yes. Agnes is in the shop office. Mr. Patel is checking invoices, though he checks them 3 times when he is worried and once when he is calm." "Which number is this?" 4. Hamish stepped inside briefly. The warmth hit him with such kindness that he felt ashamed of enjoying it. Agnes stood by the office door. She wore the same neat gloves as before, dark wool with leather palms. Her face looked composed, but not peaceful. "Mr. Carrow is late," she said. "Aye, he enjoys making people wait. Some folk do." She looked toward the yard. "I did not want this club, you know. People asked me to run it." Hamish said nothing. "I keep records. I make sure no one takes advantage. Without rules, kindness becomes chaos." "That can happen. It does happen." From outside came the clatter of something metal in the wind. Mrs. Patel moved to the window. "There is a light," she said. Hamish turned. A torch beam jerked near the shed, low to the ground, then disappeared. He was out the door before anyone else moved. The sleet needled his face. His boots slid in the slush as he crossed the yard. The security light flickered once, steadied, and showed the shed padlock hanging open. The door itself was ajar. "Neil?" Hamish called. No answer. He found him beyond the shed, near the tank base, half on the frozen ground and half against the timber support. Neil Carrow's clipboard lay a few feet away, papers wet and curling. One gloved hand was near the padlock, the other tucked under him at an awkward angle. There was no dramatic pool of blood, no theatrical arrangement. Just a man who had been loud and alive that afternoon, now horribly still beneath the sleet. Hamish crouched, touched his neck, and knew. Behind him, Blair's voice thundered from the lane. "What's happened?" Hamish closed his eyes briefly. "How did you get here so fast?" "Radio call from Patel. I was nearby." That'll be a comfort to criminals everywhere. Blair shouldered past him, breathing hard. He looked at Neil, then at the shed, then at Agnes and the Patels, standing under the yard light. "Slipped," he said. "Fool came poking round in ice and cracked his head." No one spoke. Then Blair seemed to remember there was a larger audience possible in murder than accident. He straightened. "Or maybe not. Nobody move. This could be suspicious." "It was suspicious before you arrived," said Hamish. Blair glared. "You touch anything?" "No." "You always say that." "I often mean it." MacNab arrived next, calm, capable, and blessedly less loud. The scene was secured. Agnes was taken inside. The Patels were asked to wait. The sleet kept falling, softening edges, blurring tracks, making time into water. Hamish moved carefully around the shed. Torch angled low. The padlock bore fresh scratches near the keyhole, bright under the wet. Not old weathering. Recent. He crouched by the slush near the threshold. There was oil there. Not much. A faint rainbow skin on dirty ice, and the smell, sharp, mineral, unmistakable, rising when he disturbed it. Someone had stepped through oil or spilled a little, then trodden back toward the loch. Blair came up behind him. "What are you sniffing at?" "Oil. It's a fuel shed, Macbeth." "Were you expecting lavender?" Oil outside the line of use, near the loch, and fresh scratches. Blair bent, squinted, then stood. "Could be Caro." He opened it. "With what?" Blair pointed at Neil's pocket. "Keys." Hamish looked toward Neil's body. The keyring lay near his hand. The shed key was on it, clean except for rain. "Maybe," said Hamish. He did not think so. A little farther from the door, in the churned slush, he saw boot prints. Several overlapped. Neil's heavier tread. Patel's smaller, flat-soled prints from earlier. Another pattern, narrower, with a worn patch on the heel. The weather would take them soon. "Get photographs," Hamish called. Blair barked. "I know my job. That'll save time for us all." Agnes appeared in the shop doorway with Mrs. Patel's arm around her. Her face was pale. She did not look at the body. She looked at the shed. It was a small thing, Hamish noticed. Later, after the ambulance had come and gone, after Neil Caro's van had been locked and the yard emptied, Hamish walked home through sleet that had turned to wet snow. His cottage would be cold. He knew that before he opened the door. Inside, Luggs greeted him by remaining asleep, which was perhaps kinder than sympathy. Hamish took off his coat, lit the range with the last of the kindling, and held his hands near the weak heat. Neil Caro had threatened to expose something. Now he was dead. Outside, Lochdu's windows glowed here and there through the weather. Behind each one, somebody would be telling the story already. By morning, Hamish knew, the village would have chosen what kind of death it preferred. Chapter 5. Canteen grease, real soup. The police canteen in Inverness offered food with the grim confidence of an institution that knew its customers had nowhere else to go. Hamish looked down at the plate in front of him. The stew had the colour of wet cardboard and the ambition of paste. Blair was eating his own portion as if punishing it. "Accident," Blair said with his mouth full. "Then maybe murder. Depends what the pathologist gives us. That's a wide professional range. It's called keeping an open mind. It's called keeping two headlines ready." Blair stabbed a potato. "Don't get clever, Macbeth. I've got a dead fuel man, a scratched lock, missing oil, and a village full of folk who'd sell their granny for a warm radiator. Most folk in Lochdu would keep their granny and share a blanket. That's your trouble. Sentimental." Hamish pushed the stew aside. Hunger had limits. MacNab came in with a file and sat down. "Preliminary says Caro died from head injury after a fall or push. Bruising on one wrist. No sign of a weapon. Could have slipped during a struggle." Blair brightened. "There we are. Struggle. Rory Bain." Hamish looked at him. "That was quick. He's young, skint, angry, and his house is cold. Half the village is cold. Half the village Hasna got his record. Rory's record consisted of 2 foolish thefts when he was 17, 1 fight outside a pub, and a persistent refusal to look respectable enough to be forgiven. Macnab said. Carrow's notebook was found in the van. 1 page missing. Hamish sat up. Which page? Hard to tell. Last entries are delivery notes, seal counts, tank readings, then torn stub. Any list of serial numbers? Not in the book. Blair waved a fork. He tore it out himself. Maybe. Or Rory took it. Rory wouldn't know what it meant. He'd know enough to hide evidence. Hamish said nothing. Silence sometimes irritated Blair more efficiently than speech. By afternoon, Hamish had escaped Inverness and gone to the little Italian place on the road back, where the owner, Lucia, believed soup was a civic duty. She put a bowl in front of him without asking, thick with beans, tomato, garlic, and something green enough to suggest hope. You look frozen, she said. I'm thawing from the inside. You police always come when there is trouble. Never when I make cake. That may be because your cake is too good for evidence, she snorted. Eat! He ate. Warmth returned in degrees, not only to his hands, but to his thinking. Neil's missing page bothered him. A man like Neil Carrow did not make a show of serial numbers and then forget them. If he had compared seals to dockets, and if 1 page was gone, someone knew that page mattered. Who? Agnes kept records. The Patels had the keys nearby, but seemed more anxious about the club's reputation than any private gain. Rory was poor, angry, and convenient. Archie sometimes helped carry oil cans for older folk. Mrs. Wellington knew everyone's business through the simple method of demanding it. And then there were the emergency top-ups. Hamish had seen how people looked when Agnes mentioned them. Not grateful. Not only grateful. Bound. After the soup, he stopped again at Patel's. The shop was quieter than usual. Death had made people solemn, but not less curious. They spoke in lowered voices near the flour and listened hard near the counter. Mrs. Patel took him through to the back kitchen. Sunsy appeared in the doorway, a strip of shadow with whiskers, gave Hamish a look of brief professional assessment, and vanished under the dresser. She comes in when it is cold, Mrs. Patel said. Aye. Don't we all? Mr. Patel spread paperwork on the table. Delivery dockets, sign-up sheets, copies of invoices. His fingers tapped the edge of each page. Agnes keeps the master ledger, he said. We keep supplier papers because deliveries come through our yard. And the emergency top-ups? Mrs. Patel looked at him. Agnes keeps those. Why not here? People are embarrassed. They do not want names on the shop sheet. Hamish nodded. Who gets to know? Agnes. Sometimes me, if I make a call. Sometimes Mr. Patel, if there is a can to move. But Agnes says, dignity is private. That's a fine phrase. Mrs. Patel's mouth tightened. It can be. Hamish examined the dockets. Delivery volume. Tank gauge before and after. Seal serials listed in printed blocks, with handwritten notes where seals were snapped and replaced. 1 line had been corrected heavily, the number overwritten until the paper nearly tore. Who wrote this? Mr. Patel leaned closer. Agnes. The driver forgot to record 1 seal, she said. Which driver? Neil Carrow. Hamish looked at the overwritten digits. Did Neil often forget? No, said Mr. Patel. He was many things, but not careless with forms. At the shop front, Blair's voice boomed. Macbeth, are you hiding in the pantry? Mrs. Patel whispered. Unfortunately, no. Hamish went out. Blair stood by the counter, flushed and pleased. Rory Bain was beside him, pale with fury. Tell your local stray here, Blair said, that refusing to answer questions doesn't make him look innocent. Rory said. I answered. You said you were home. I was. Alone. My house is not crowded with admirers. Blair smiled. And no oil, I hear. Rory's face closed. The shop heard every word. Hamish felt the room tilt toward Rory, not in hatred, but in relief. Here was a shape that fit the fear. A young man with a cold house and a past. Let it be him, and nobody else had to look too closely at need, debt, or favours owed. That'll do, said Hamish. Blair turned. You don't decide that. No. But you'll stop enjoying it. For a moment, Blair's face darkened. Then he shoved past Rory and out into the street. Rory remained where he was, fists clenched. Mrs. Patel said softly, Tea? He shook his head. Not because he did not want it, Hamish thought. Because everyone would see him accept. Chapter 6. The Easy Villain. The village chose Rory Bain by lunchtime. No one announced it. There was no vote. It happened in the way these things happen. Through pauses before a name. Through lowered voices that rose as soon as he left. Through the sudden willingness of people to remember every small wrong he had ever committed and forget every kindness that did not fit. At Patel's, the queue formed early. Cold had become both necessity and entertainment. People bought matches, candles, bread, batteries, and excuses. I am not saying Rory did it, Nessie Curry said, saying Rory had done it with every syllable. I am only saying he has always had a temper. A temper, Jessie echoed. And a thin coat. A thin coat. Mrs. Wellington held a tin of soup at arm's length, reading the label with suspicion. Poverty is not evidence. Nessie looked wounded. Who said poverty? You did not need to. Archie came in, stamping snow from his boots. Rory helped my cousin last month when her flue blocked. That is nice, said Nessie, in the tone of someone putting niceness outside the main argument. Hamish, who was pretending to compare brands of candles, listened. Rory himself was absent. That made him easier to discuss. People are always tidier as rumours than as human beings. Blair arrived with 2 constables and a mood of performance. He asked questions in the shop, in the lane, at the hall. He stood too close to people and mistook discomfort for guilt. By mid-afternoon, he had Rory at the police station. Hamish watched the interview from the corner, leaning back in his chair as if half asleep. Neil Carrow accused you in the street, Blair said. He accused everyone. He knew you needed oil. So did everyone. You were angry. I'm often angry. It saves time. Blair slapped a hand on the table. Don't be smart. Rory stared at the table. I was at home. Alone. Yes? Freezing. Rory's mouth twisted. Does being cold make me a killer? It makes you desperate. Hamish spoke before Blair could go further. Did you know about the tamper seals? Rory blinked. What? The red plastic seals on the nozzle. No. Serial numbers? What serial numbers? Blair snapped. Don't answer him. Answer me. He is answering, said Hamish. Rory looked between them. For the first time all day, something like fear moved plainly across his face. Not fear of prison alone. Fear of being made into the story everybody wanted. Afterward, Blair announced that Rory was helping with enquiries, a phrase Lochs translated instantly into court. Hamish went back to the shed before dusk. The yard had been photographed, measured, trampled, and half frozen again. The air smelled of wet timber and oil. He crouched near the loch, where the slush had crusted overnight, and worked carefully with a twig. There, just under a ridge of grit-blackened ice, something red showed. He eased it free. A fragment of plastic seal, no bigger than a fingernail. Its broken edge carried the same half-moon bite as the one Neil had snapped in the hall. Fresh. The red still bright, where it had been protected from weather. A few tiny black digits remained. Hamish held it in his palm. Rory Bain would not know to remove a serial number page from Neil's notebook. He would not know which seal mattered. He would not stage a lock scratch while leaving the keyring near Neil's hand. If Rory stole oil, he would likely steal it badly, angrily, and with the subtlety of a boot through a door. This was not Rory's sort of mess. It was a tidy person's mess, a careful person's emergency. Behind him, Mrs. Patel opened the back door. You found something? A small piece of truth, maybe. She stepped into the yard, wrapping her cardigan tighter. People are saying Rory. Aye. Aye. They like it? Hamish looked at her. Mrs. Patel's expression was sad, not surprised. It is easier if the thief is someone they already look down on. Aye. I told Agnes that. She said one must not sentimentalise. When? This morning. Hamish turned the seal fragment. Agnes was here? For 5 minutes. She wanted the top-up sheet from last week. I said it was in her folder, not ours. She was upset. Upset how? Very controlled. In Hamish's experience, very controlled was often worse than shouting. That evening, he walked past Rory's cottage. No smoke came from the chimney. A weak light showed through the front window. He thought of knocking, but did not. A visit from him would become another item in the village account book of suspicion. At home, the cottage had taken on the damp cold of a place that resented habitation. Lugs sat by the range, nose tucked under tail, conserving hope. Hamish fed him, then set the red fragment beside the earlier sample seal on his table. 2 broken bits. Same strange bite. 1 casual. 1 found by a loch after a death. He lit a candle and watched the tiny flame reflect in the plastic. The village wanted a thief. Hamish was beginning to wonder whether it had been living under one for some time. Chapter 7. Hamish's Mistake. The church hall corridor was warmer than it had any moral right to be. The heaters hummed along the wall, making the air smell faintly of dust, damp coats, and old varnish. People drifted in and out under various pretences. Someone had left a bag of knitting in the main room. Someone else had come to check whether a notice about the Burns supper needed straightening. Archie was there to look at the fuse box, though he had no screwdriver. The Curry sisters hovered near the kitchen hatch, guarding a plate of scones from nobody. Hamish had come to collect his hidden heater. He found Mrs. Patel in the corridor carrying tea towels. "Rory's in trouble," she said quietly. "Aye, I know his house is cold, but people should not keep saying it." "No," said Hamish. "They shouldna. I only told Agnes because she asked who might need an emergency top-up." Hamish looked at her. "When?" "Last month. Rory refused it. He said he would manage. Agnes said pride was a luxury, a dangerous phrase." Mrs. Patel looked stricken. "I did wrong?" "No. You meant kindness. That is not always enough, is it?" Hamish sighed. "Could you maybe stop repeating that Rory couldna pay? Even in sympathy. It gives folk a handle." She nodded at once. "Yes, of course." He should have left it there. Instead, because he was tired and cold and irritated by the way the village had settled on Rory like crows on a fence, he added, "If anyone asks, say I'm looking elsewhere. Say Rory's desperation is not evidence." It was meant to protect him. By evening, Lochdu had improved the sentence. At Patel's, someone told Nessie that Hamish had said Rory was desperate. Nessie told Jessie that Hamish had practically admitted it. Jessie told Mrs. Wellington that Hamish was looking elsewhere because of Rory's desperation, which made no sense but sounded important. By the time it reached Blair, Rory Bain had become so desperate that even Hamish Macbeth knew it. Blair stormed into the police station, as if propelled by indignation and fried food. "What the hell are you playing at?" Hamish looked up from Neil's delivery dockets. "Good evening." "Don't good evening me. You're telling witnesses Rory's desperate." "No. Half the village says you are." "Half the village says a great deal. It's how it exercises." Blair leaned over the desk. "You interfering wee clown. I'm building a case." "You're building a scaffold and hoping the man fits." Blair's face purpled. "Rory Bain had motive. So did anyone who needed the Fuel Club kept quiet." "Name one." Hamish thought of Agnes, but did not say it. "Not yet." Blair jabbed a finger at him. "You always do this. You make everything local and soft. People kill for simple reasons, Macbeth. Money, fear, anger, aye, and shame." Blair snorted. Shame never killed anyone. Hamish looked at him. That may be the daftest thing you've said this winter, and you've been working hard. The door opened behind Blair. Rory Bain stood there, face white, eyes hard. I heard, he said. Hamish rose. Rory! No, I heard enough. I was trying to stop folk. Stop folk? Rory laughed. You told them I was desperate. I said desperation was not evidence. In Lochs, that's the same thing. He turned and left before Hamish could answer. Blair smiled. Well done. Hamish said nothing. It was not often Blair was right even by accident, but this time he had the satisfaction of being present when Hamish felt foolish. Later, Hamish went to see Morag Macbeth, who lived 2 cottages beyond the hall and cleaned occasionally for Agnes. She had left a message saying she might have seen something the night Neil died. When he arrived, she opened the door only halfway. I should not have called, she said. You saw something? No. Morag. She twisted the edge of her cardigan. I saw a person near the back lane. Maybe. With a can. Maybe. Who? I don't know. But you think you do. Her eyes filled suddenly with frightened anger. And then I'll be next, will I? Next poor thing everyone discusses. Morag seeing things. Morag with her lecky bill overdue. Morag who took an emergency top-up and did not pay straight away. Who knows that? She shut her mouth. Agnes? Hamish asked softly. Morag looked away. A car went by outside, slow on the icy road. In a village, even passing headlights felt nosy. I canna, Morag whispered. I won't have them all knowing. Hamish did not push. He had learned, too late that day, how easily protection could turn into exposure. He walked back through the village under a low, black sky. At the hall, light shone through the frosted windows. People were inside again, warming themselves with tea and other people's troubles. His own heater remained hidden behind the chairs. He took it home under his coat like contraband. At the cottage, Luggs sniffed it, and then gave Hamish a look of such solemn disapproval that Hamish nearly apologised. Aye, he said. I made a mess. The dog lay down with a sigh. Outside, Lochs settled into cold. Inside, Hamish began again. Chapter 8. The Serial Numbers. Agnes Meldrum's kitchen was so tidy that Hamish felt his boots had entered into a moral failing. The floor shone. The stove was blacked. Biscuits stood in straight rows on a plate beneath a glass cover. Even the dishcloth appeared to have been folded after reflection. The only sign of disorder was the radio on the window muttering weather warnings about ice, sleet, and unnecessary journeys. You'll have tea, Agnes said. It was not a question. I wouldn't refuse. No, few men do. She poured from a brown pot and set the cup down exactly in front of him. Her hands were bare now. Short nails. No rings except a narrow wedding band, worn thin. I do not know what more I can tell you, she said. Neil Carrow was rude, but rudeness is not a capital offence. No. And Rory Bain is unfortunate, but misfortune is not innocence. That's true too. She looked at him sharply, perhaps surprised he had not disagreed. Hamish took out a small notebook. I'm trying to understand the emergency top-ups. Agnes's face settled into an expression of patient burden. People need help. They dislike asking for it. I keep that side separate to protect dignity. Separate from the club ledger? Yes. So the official sheet shows paid orders. Naturally. And the top-ups? Temporary advances. Recorded where? She stood, crossed to a narrow drawer beneath the dresser, and removed a small blue notebook. She did not hand it to him at once. These are private. A man is dead. Privacy does not become worthless because death has entered a room. It was a good sentence. Hamish wondered how often she had prepared it. She gave him the book. Inside, names appeared in neat columns. Morag Macbeth, Old Mr. Cameron, Rory Bain, with a line through it, Mrs. Fraser at the Hill Road. Amounts, dates, notes. Some entries had ticks, some had initials, some had small marks beside them. A cross, a dot, a tiny circle. What are these symbols? My system. For what? Follow-up. Hamish looked up. Payment? Sometimes. What else? Whether people are managing. The radio crackled. Snow on higher roads. Drivers advised to take care. Agnes moved to turn it down. As she reached, Hamish caught the faintest smell from the gloves lying on the chair beside her coat. Heating oil. He glanced at them. Dark wool. Leather palms. The same pair she had worn at the shopyard. A person could get oil on gloves innocently. Anyone near the shed might. But Agnes had said more than once that she never handled the fuel. She ran records, not nozzles. That was her line. You've been at the shed lately? He asked. No. Not even to check the gauge? Mr. Patel does that. Your gloves smell of oil. For the first time, Agnes made a mistake with her face. It was small. A flicker, no more. Then she smiled. Everything smells of oil in this village at present. Not biscuits. That depends who bakes them. Hamish almost smiled. Agnes, under pressure, was not without wit. He turned a page. Rory refused an emergency top-up. Yes. Foolish pride. Yet he's marked here. To ask again? And did you? No. He has been rude to me. A hanging offence in some committees. Her eyes hardened. You joke, because you have never had to keep people from taking advantage. Hamish set the notebook down. Who takes advantage? Those who think kindness means no rules. Those who pay late and expect silence. Those who resent the person who keeps the list because the list proves they needed help. There it was. Not confession, not even guilt, but the shape of a private kingdom. Hamish said. Neil asked for this book. He had no right to it. He thought it might explain missing fuel. It explains charity. Does it? Agnes stood. I have given years to this village. Years. I arrange deliveries. I chase payments quietly. I make sure old people are not humiliated in the shop queue. I absorb complaints from those who cannot add figures and those who can but prefer not to. And now, because a supplier's man came in throwing accusations, you look at me as if I were common. Common what? Her mouth closed. It was another tiny mistake. A car door slammed outside. Agnes turned toward the window. Blair was arriving, which rarely improved a kitchen. He entered without waiting properly, bringing cold air and satisfaction. Macbeth. There you are. Rory Bain's alibi has holes. Most alibis do when you poke them with your thumb. Blair ignored him. Mrs. Meldrum, did Rory owe the club money? Agnes's face resumed control. He had difficulties. Did he owe money? He had not paid all he should. Hamish looked down at the blue notebook. Rory's refused top-up had been crossed out. His official order was small but paid. Blair did not know that. Agnes did. Blair smiled. There we are, Hamish said. There we are, where? At Mative. Being cold is not the same as stealing. No, but owing money and being angry gets us closer. Blair turned to Agnes. You'll make a statement. Of course. Hamish closed the blue notebook and handed it back. Agnes took it carefully, but not before he saw a loose slip tucked into the back cover. A line of numbers. Serial numbers, perhaps. Not enough time to read them. Thank you for the tea, he said. It was nothing. People often said that when it had been something. Outside, Blair stamped toward his car. You're wasting time with committee women. Hamish watched snow begin to fall in small, hard grains. Maybe, he said, but he did not think so. Chapter 9. Sunsea delivers plastic. The fuse tripped at 6:10, just as Hamish had persuaded the kettle to begin. The cottage fell dark. From the chair by the range, Luggs lifted his head and gave a weary blink, as if electricity were another human habit he had never trusted. I know, said Hamish. We're all suffering. He relit the lamp, reset the fuse, and decided against the kettle. Tea was becoming an ambition rather than a beverage. Outside, the cold had hardened again. The windows showed black glass with faint reflections. Himself, the lamp, a room that looked poorer when watched too closely. On the table lay his notes. Neil's missing page, the red seal from the hall, the fragment from the shed, Agnes's emergency notebook, the smell of oil on gloves, Rory's refused top-up, Morag's fear, the overwritten seal number on Patel's docket. Hamish rubbed his eyes. A small thump sounded at the door. Lugs did not move. Another thump. Hamish took the lamp and opened the door. Sunsy stood on the step, snow speckling his back, tail high with insult. In front of him lay a small red object. He looked at Hamish, as if the delivery had been made at considerable inconvenience. "Well," said Hamish. "Post is late." Sunsy slipped past him into the cottage without permission and disappeared toward the kitchen. Hamish picked up the object. A snapped red tamper seal. Not a fragment this time, but nearly half the loop, flattened, dirty along one edge, with the serial number still legible. Its broken side had the same distinctive half-moon notch. Hamish stood very still. Sunsy had not fetched it from nowhere. Cats did not produce evidence out of civic concern. They carried small objects from places they prowled, under steps, behind sheds, along walls, beneath woodpiles. He stepped back outside and looked at the snow. Tiny paw marks led from the side path that ran behind the cottages toward the lane near Agnes Meldrum's back garden. "Of course," Hamish murmured. Sunsy, from inside, made a sound that suggested he had already known. Within the hour, Hamish was at Patel's kitchen table, with Mr. Patel's carbon copies spread before him. Mrs. Patel made tea and did not pretend not to read over his shoulder. "This number," Hamish said, pointing to the seal Sunsy had brought. "Where is it?" Mr. Patel checked the supplier list. "Batch 7. Winter delivery." "Marked used?" Mr. Patel frowned. "No. It should be intact. See? That delivery line was queried." "By Neil?" "Yes. He wrote a note. Then Agnes said he had corrected it." Mrs. Patel leaned closer. "That is one of the missing seals?" "Aye." Mr. Patel's face changed slowly. "Then someone used the nozzle and did not record it, or recorded it somewhere private." Hamish went next to the depot office, after persuading a sleepy duty manager that a dead regional rep was reason enough to open files. Neil Carrow's carbon delivery records were less tidy than Agnes's, but more honest in the way working paperwork often is. Numbers were printed, crossed, initialed, and dated. One photocopied sheet showed Neil's handwriting in the margin. "Seal batch 7 discrepancy ask A. M. Re-private top-ups. A. M. Agnes Meldrum." Below it were partial serials, 3 of which matched the overwritten line at Patel's, and 1 of which matched the seal Sunsy had brought to the door. At dawn, Hamish returned to Lochdew with MacNab. They did not go first to Agnes. They went to Morag McPhee. Morag opened the door looking as if she had not slept. "I can't," she said before either spoke. "You can," said Hamish. "And you won't be the only one." That was not strictly a promise, but it was close enough to courage. Morag told them then. She had seen Agnes on the night Neil died, not clearly at first, but clear enough when the yard light caught her face. Agnes had been carrying a small can from the direction of the shed. Morag had thought it was another private top-up. She had thought nothing of it until Neil died. Then she had thought too much. "She helped me," Morag whispered, "when I had nothing. Then, later, when I disagreed about the hall cleaning rota, she reminded me. Not plain. Agnes does not do plain. But enough." "What did she say?" Morag swallowed. "Some people forget who kept them warm." Hamish nodded. After that, MacNab did what official procedure required. Agnes's house was searched. In the narrow drawer beneath the hall stand, where scarves and work gloves were kept, they found a small cloth purse. Inside was a pocketful of snapped red tamper seals. Several bore serial numbers from the disputed winter delivery. Several had the same half-moon break. Agnes watched from the kitchen doorway as Macnab bagged them. She did not cry. She did not protest loudly. Her face carried the look of a woman offended by disorder, even when the disorder was truth. "You had no right," she said. Macnab, who had dealt with many people and most kinds of right, said nothing. Hamish looked at the gloves in the drawer. "Oil smell stronger now." "Neil found the pattern," he said. Agnes turned her eyes on him. "Neil Carrow found what he wanted to find." "Aye, numbers. He did not understand people. Maybe not. But numbers were enough." Her lips pressed together. For a moment, Hamish thought she might speak. Instead, she folded her hands. By afternoon, the village had heard there would be a fuel club meeting at the hall. It was described as clarification, which ensured attendance more effectively than confession would have done. People liked to believe they came for facts, not drama. Before going, Hamish stopped at his cottage. The range had taken at last, and a modest warmth moved through the room. Lugs occupied the chair nearest it, with the serene entitlement of a retired magistrate. Sunsy sat on the window-sill, washing one paw. "You're no joining the force," Hamish told him. Sunsy did not look up. "No pension either." The cat continued washing. Hamish put the bagged seal fragment in his pocket, looked once around the poor, cold cottage that had started all his private embarrassment, and went out to face a warmer room. Chapter 10. Distribution Day. By 4 o'clock, the church hall was full. Cold brought them. Curiosity kept them. Shame arranged where they sat. The heaters hummed. Coats steamed faintly on chairbacks. The tea-urn stood ready, because even disgrace in Lochdu required refreshment. Agnes Meldrum sat at the front table, composed in a dark coat, her handbag placed neatly before her. Rory Bain stood near the back wall, arms folded, trying to look as if he had not been wounded by the week. The Patels sat together. Morag McPhee kept her eyes down. Archie McLean leaned by the notice board. Mrs. Wellington had taken a front chair, with the posture of a woman prepared to witness truth and correct grammar. Nessie and Jessie Curry sat side by side, unusually quiet. Blair arrived late, which meant loudly. "What's this, Macbeth?" he said, stamping snow from his shoes. "A parish court?" "A clarification," said Hamish. Blair snorted. "Aye. Well, I'll clarify it." Rory Bain. "No," said Hamish. The room turned. Blair stared. "No?" Hamish's face remained mild. "You no start with Rory." "I'll start where I like. You've done that all week." It hasna helped. A flush crawled up Blair's neck. "Mind yourself." Hamish's voice softened, and the softness cut more cleanly than anger. "Rory Bain was made small in this room, and in the shop, and in the street, because it suited folk to make him small. You'll not use him again to warm your hands." The hall went very still. Rory looked at the floor. Blair opened his mouth, then saw Macnab near the side door, and thought better of whatever performance had been forming. Hamish turned to the tables. "Neil Carrow came here because the Fuel Club records didna match the tank." He was rude about it, and loud, and he spoke of accountability as if it were a stick he was fond of using, but he had found something real. Agnes folded her gloved hands. Hamish placed a clear evidence bag on the table. Inside lay the first red seal fragment. "Most of you saw him snap a red tamper seal in this hall. It broke with a wee half-moon notch, a flaw in one batch. I noticed it because small things sometimes have more manners than large ones. They wait quietly until needed." Blair muttered, "For God's sake." Hamish ignored him. "After Neil died, I found another red fragment by the shedlock. Same sort of break. Fresh. Later, another piece turned up at my cottage, carried by Sunsy from the back lanes." "Sunsy?" said Jessie before she could stop herself. "Aye," said Hamish. "A witness with poor respect for procedure." A small, uneasy laugh moved through the hall and died quickly. Hamish took out copies of the supplier docket. Each seal has a serial number. Neil was comparing those numbers with the delivery records and with the club's notes. One page from his notebook was torn out. We now know what was on it. He laid down another paper. Several seals from the winter delivery were marked as intact or unaccounted for, but the nozzle had been used. Oil was taken from the club tank in small quantities over weeks, not enough at once to shout. "Enough to make the gauge wrong," Agnes said. "People needed help." Her voice was calm. Hamish looked at her. "Some did." The words shifted the room. "You kept an emergency top-up book separate from the official ledger," he continued. "Folk thought it was kindness. Sometimes it was. Old Mr. Cameron got oil before the freeze. Morag got enough to keep her pipes from bursting. Mrs. Fraser got a can when her son was late sending money." Faces turned. Morag closed her eyes. Hamish said, "But private help became private power. You decided who deserved warmth and who needed a lesson. You kept names, marks, debts. You reminded people quietly. You punished those who crossed you by delaying help or by letting others know they were behind." Agnes's mouth tightened. "That is an ugly interpretation." "Aye, it is also ungrateful." Mrs. Patel flinched. Hamish's tone remained even. Neil found the serial discrepancies. He asked about private top-ups. He planned to report mismanagement. That would have ended the club discount and exposed the names you had kept hidden. The club would have collapsed because of him. "No," said Hamish. "Because of you." For the first time, Agnes's composure cracked. Not into tears, but into anger. "I held this together. Do you think these people manage themselves? They forget dates, underpay, overclaim, complain, and whisper. They come to me at dusk, asking that no one know. I kept them warm." "You sold warmth by the favour," said Hamish. "I gave it. You took it first." Blair stepped forward. "So she nicked oil. That still doesn't prove murder." Hamish turned on him, and the room felt the change before he spoke. "No, Blair. The seals prove theft. The gloves prove handling. Morag saw Agnes near the shed with a can the night Neil died. The lock scratches show someone tried to make the shed look forced. Neil's wrist bruising shows a struggle, and the torn notebook page was missing because it listed the numbers now found in Agnes's glove drawer. A sound passed through the hall. Not surprise, exactly. Betrayal. Agnes sat very straight. Hamish faced her. "Neil came after hours. He confronted you. Maybe he threatened to take the book. Maybe he said he'd tell the whole village who had been helped. Maybe he said head office would end the club. You argued near the shed. He grabbed your wrist, or you grabbed his. He slipped on oil and ice, or you pushed harder than you meant. He fell. He died." "No," Agnes said. The word was quiet. Hamish waited. She looked around the hall then, not at him, but at the people she had helped, managed, judged, and bound to her. Her eyes lingered on Morag, then Rory, then Mrs. Patel. "He would have ruined everything," she said. No one moved. He stood there with his clipboard, sneering. "He said people like us should not run schemes we could not account for. People like us. He was going to write it all down. Names, amounts, delays, favours." Her voice shook now, but still with fury more than grief. "Do you know what happens when private need becomes public record? It never leaves a person. It follows them into shops, churches, marriages, funerals," Hamish said gently. "So you protected them by letting them believe Rory killed a man?" Agnes looked at Rory then. His face was pale and closed. "I did not say he did it," she whispered. "You didna need to." That was the cruelest truth in the room, and the one everyone understood. Agnes lowered her eyes. Neil laughed. He said a few cold houses would teach people to pay properly. "I took the can from him. He caught my wrist. We struggled. He fell. I thought he was winded. Then I saw—" She stopped. "I saw he was not getting up. And after?" Her voice became small. "I scratched the lock. I took the page. I thought if it looked like theft, people would look where they always look." "At Rory," said Mrs. Wellington. Agnes did not answer. Macnab moved forward. "Agnes Meldrum, I'm arresting you." Blair, recovering himself, barked. "I'll do it." "No," said Macnab. It was such a simple word that even Blair obeyed, though not gracefully. Agnes rose without being touched. She picked up her handbag, then seemed to remember she would not need it. For one moment, she looked merely old and cold. As MacNab led her out, nobody spoke. The hall door opened. Winter entered, sharp and clean. Then the door closed again. Blair cleared his throat. "Well? Good work all round?" Mrs. Patel looked at him. No, it was not loud. It did not need to be. Blair reddened, found no useful answer, and went outside to smoke where he could be important alone. For a while, the hall remained silent. Then Mrs. Wellington stood, walked to Rory Bain, and held out a tin. "Soup," she said. Rory stared at it. "It is shop-bought," she added. "So neither of us need pretend it is a personal triumph." His mouth twitched. "I did not steal oil," he said. "I know," said Mrs. Wellington. "But you may still eat soup." It was as near as she could come to an apology in public, perhaps nearer than most. Morag McPhee began to cry quietly. Mrs. Patel went to her, not with speeches, but with a cup of tea. Archie opened the hall cupboard and found extra blankets that had been stored for some event nobody remembered. Nessie whispered something to Jessie, but Jessie shook her head, and for once nothing was repeated. Hamish stood near the door, watching the village rearrange itself around what it had done. Heat would return. The supplier would send an emergency delivery under supervision. The ledger would be remade. Someone other than Agnes would hold the pen. But trust, Hamish knew, did not refill like a tank. When he stepped outside, the sky had cleared. The cold was fierce, but the stars were out over Lochdew, sharp as pinpricks. Blair was smoking by his car. "You enjoyed making me look a fool," he said. Hamish pulled on his gloves. "No," Blair snorted. "Liar." Hamish looked toward the hall windows, where figures moved in warm yellow light. "There was enough shame in there without me enjoying yours." For once, Blair had no answer. Hamish walked home slowly. His cottage would still be cold. His tank would still be low. His pride had not come out of the week unmarked either. At the door, Lugs met him with the solemn hope of supper. Inside, the lamp waited. The range had gone out. Hamish looked at it, sighed, and reached for the kindling. Behind him, from somewhere in the dark, came the soft sound of Sonsi landing on the windowsill. "Do not start," Hamish said. Sonsi stared at him through the glass, perfectly unimpressed. Hamish laughed then, quietly, and opened the door. Cold came in. So did the cat. And for the first time all week, the cottage felt a little less empty. Lochdew got its heat back. The oil lorry came 2 days later, carefully watched by more villagers than any delivery deserved. Radiators ticked, kettles boiled, damp socks dried over ranges. Yet the old comfort, that easy phrase, "we look after our own," had not returned quite so quickly. People remembered how readily they had settled on Rory Bain because he was young, angry, poor, and already half condemned in their minds. They remembered how embarrassment can make cowards of decent folk, and they remembered that help, when tied to control, is not kindness any more. The red tamper seal was made to prove honesty. A cheap thing, a small thing. Yet its little half-moon break told the truth when people would not. Plastic does not care about pride. It simply keeps the shape of what happened. Pride makes a harsh blanket. In a community afraid of shame, the vulnerable are often punished first, because blaming them lets everyone else feel clean. Still, small mercies came back. Soup appeared quietly on steps. Bills were paid without signatures. Lugs slept by the fire as if he had arranged the repair of society himself. Sonsi prowled the village with the private satisfaction of a creature who had always distrusted committees. Warmth returned, not as a slogan, but as something carried from door to door. In a small town, what do you think people hide more carefully, money troubles or needing help? Thank you for spending this cold week in Lochdew with us. If this mystery kept you company, leave a light in the window for the next visit. And remember, when the oil tank runs dry, Hamish Macbeth knows to check not only the gauge, but the pride gathered around it.